like to call the meeting to order of our public board meeting of March 15th, 2022. The Board of Education acknowledges that we are on the traditional territories of the Comox First Nation. We would like to thank them for the privilege of living on their land and the gift of working with their children. First item on our agenda is the adoption of our agenda. And I'm wondering if somebody would like to move the adoption. Are you moving the adoption of the agenda?
I want to move the adoption of the agenda with an amendment on it. So
Okay.
under where it says the board standing committee reports, the finance committee board report, will be a verbal update on the trustee for a memorial for Bunny Shannon.
Sorry, under 10A?
Yes, under 10A, Finance Committee Board Report, a verbal
Okay.
update on the trustee memorial bursary for Bunny Shannon.
Great. Thank you very much, Trustee Caton. Are there any other additions or changes to the agenda? What do you do about Okay, doesn't look like it. So I'm looking for a mover to adopt the amended agenda for the March 15th, 2022 regular public board meeting as amended. Trustee Caton and Trustee Howe. Any discussion? All those in favor, please show.
I did.
Okay, I missed it, sorry. It's carried, thank you. All right, next is the board meeting minutes. Looking for somebody to move that the Board of Education for School District 71 Comox Valley adopt the February 22nd, 2022 regular public board meeting minutes as presented. Trustee Howe and Trustee Hawksby, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to unfinished business. We have no unfinished business. Next is the record of the in-camera minutes of February 22nd, 2022. And I don't believe we need to approve those. Just information. And next is the board chair's report. Our board chair is unavailable tonight, and as the vice chair, I've taken on this role. And I find myself that it's a great opportunity to share an experience that I had last weekend. I attended our district musical, and it's our high schools that come together to perform and engage and learn and grow and laugh, and it was amazing. And I was finding it hard to explain my gratitude to the district for supporting this initiative, and especially this year with the impacts that we've all felt with COVID over the past few years, and the joy that you could feel coming from the students and from the crowd who attended the event. At least 2 of the events were sold out, and they were truly sold out. I saw people attend from our community who have no children who came to the event. I saw people in our community come to attend who were in our district musicals when they were in high school, and they were bringing their children who are barely school age to watch their first musical in our district. And it was very heartwarming, and I just wanted to extend my great thanks to our district staff for the hundreds of hours that they would have put in to make this happen, to the district for its support of this great initiative that builds so much capacity in our students. And to all of the students, and I know one of the students who participated, and I sat down with him and figured out it was well over 100 hours of rehearsal time put in times the multiples of students that attended and I think for right now it was really what everybody needed. So I just wanted to say thank you and extend my gratitude. And SpongeBob SquarePants, who knew? I've never watched one of the cartoons. And so I was given a crash course by some 10-year-olds of what this was really all about, which helped me frame what I was watching. So it was great. I do also want to share that we had the opportunity over the past month to have meetings with two separate meetings with our MLAs that
second highest school in all of BC, and they raised over $9,000 for the Terry Fox Fund. And most recently, I believe it was the last couple of days in an AG challenge, Highland raised well over $1,000 this month for donations to the Ukraine. All this occurring in our current situation. We have awesome students and staff that are giving and taking care of others and really believe in that kindness and carrying it forward. So thank you very much to the students and staff for those wonderful activities and donations. A few other highlights. We had 3 grade 12 female athletes, Emma Warren from Highland, Megan Lineker of Isfeld, and Reese Douglas of Vanier, who are off to represent their schools in the Island All-Star Game. So congratulations to those 3 athletes. Recently, our senior boys from Isfeld finished, and I'm looking at Director Lamoureux, 10th place finish, and they played very, very well. So congratulations to that group of athletes, and in all cases, all the coaches that donate so much of their time. Our Skills Canada, this is as we start moving into returning to something that looks like a normal system and normal school year that we've had. Skills Canada returned to an in-person competition held at Vanier. The event was the first one in 2 years. Over 250 competitors in 16 different events from 19 schools in 4 districts competed. And our senior event gold medal winners from SD 71 were Caleb, and I'm going to apologize to Caleb for if I mispronounced your last name, El Sasser from Vanier in the automotive event, and Austin Harris from Highland in the electronics event. Both will be going to the Skills Canada Provincial Championships. Congratulations. As well, this time of year, very fortunate, if you recall, presentation made in the fall, I believe, by Steve Clausen and Don Anderson around ACIT Youth Apprenticeship Awards. Well, Murray Scholl, who's been leading that, was out presenting checks of $1,000 to these students who worked, continued to be part of the school in their last semester, and once they reached that critical number of hours, they get a check from the government for $1,000. So Murray said he always refers to it as Christmas Day for him when he gets to walk around different job sites presenting money for the students, and it's a great cause, goes towards their schooling. So congratulations. Talk about the diverse accomplishments of our students, and I'm sure you may have seen this in the local paper. Isfeld grad from last year, graduate from Isfeld, and also he was in the Explorer program. Rio Crystal won the Arctic Ultra Endurance Test earlier this month, a contest that dubs itself the toughest, windiest, and coldest ultra foot race in the world. Rio was the youngest competitor in the race. The race spans 400 kilometers and more than 3,600 meters of elevation change. It runs through some of the most extreme landscapes on Earth, with temperatures dropping as low as -40. Taking place entirely in the Yukon, the race begins outside Dawson City and ends at the Arctic Circle. The racers are given 7 days to complete the race that begins at noon, February 26th, but Rio crossed the finish line on March 3rd after 4 days, 15 hours and 11 minutes. Only 6 out of 10 competitors finished, with the others withdrawing. Huge accomplishment. Rio was also a member of the GP Van Explorer program. Congratulations to Rio, perseverance, and his dedication to his sport, and just the commitment. I'm not sure how many of us could even consider this. It's an amazing, amazing thing. One of our leaders, Principal Lucinda Walters, was featured in this month's Principal Magazine, which is a magazine produced by the BC Principals and Vice Principals Association, and the feature article is a day in the life of the elementary school principal. So I will make sure we get some copies here for trustees to see. A fabulous article. It just goes through her day and an average day. So congratulations to Lucinda in celebration of her accomplishment and her work. Lots going on, and as we near spring break, final stretch, lots of changes have occurred in the last little bit. I'm going to ask our director, Jay Dixon, to share a couple of things. Number one is the change in COVID protocols as we return from spring break. We're aware of the announcement that was made last week, and so Director Dixon, if you can just share some of the changes in protocols.
Thank you, Superintendent. We're very optimistic about after spring break in our school district. When we return, everyone in schools will continue to be encouraged to do their daily health checks, stay home when sick, and to practice hygiene and respiratory etiquette. Schools can return to a classroom learning environment and configurations, and they're still going to consider strategies around space awareness and create space between people. In terms of school gatherings and events, we still will not exceed 50% capacity. However, as the superintendent has mentioned previously, we will likely be able to return to 100% capacity when our health PHO gatherings events order is lifted or expected to be lifted on April 7th. In terms of visitor access and community use, schools are going to return to a routine sign-in and sign-out practices. And the big one that everyone is excited about is the decision to wear non-medical masks or face coverings is going to become a personal choice. And a person's choice is to be supported by schools and our staff and treated with respect. We are going to provide signage around our buildings that connect to that as well. Schools will be updating their plans, signage in alignment with new protocols. They're working with our manager of health and safety. And when we return after spring break, our schools will be looking a lot more like 2 years ago. So they're being patient this week, and I commend them for continuing to follow our protocols when others around the province are already on spring break. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Dixon. As well, an announcement was made recently around a change to the graduation requirements. So the big change, and I'll get to our director once again, Director Dixon, to tell us a little bit about it, but in essence was the requirement now for all graduates to have an Indigenous-based course. So Director Dixon, if you can give us an overview.
Thank you. I'm pleased to report to the board that there's going to be a change in our graduation program, that as a part of the province's commitment to truth and reconciliation and anti-racism, the Ministry of Education will be implementing an Indigenous-focused graduation requirement for all students. The model for this change to the grad program would allow secondary students to meet the requirements through a variety of existing course offerings and some new course options that will be developed over time. The ministry will be engaging with Indigenous communities, the education sector, and the public on how to implement the plan for the new requirement. The change as background represents an important next step towards lasting and meaningful reconciliation, building on work to date to incorporate Indigenous content, perspectives into the provincial curriculum. The educators' professional development and professional standards for certified educators in BC. Implementation of this new requirement is expected to involve a phased-in approach that would come into full effect actually quite soon, the 2023-24 school year. The ministry at this point is engaging in a public engagement process to gather feedback. So if you are interested to provide feedback, you can visit the GovTogether BC website. And our schools have already begun having conversations about how we can meaningfully support this new graduation requirement and really work with our local partners to make this something special. So thank you, Superintendent. Open
Thank
to
you.
questions.
And on our website, we will have a link to that feedback loop for families to visit and provide their feedback. So that'll be on our front page of our website, hopefully tomorrow. Last thing I'd like to report on is following the decision the board made regarding a change in boundary, there was the discussion of the transition plan that would occur between Royston and Courtney Elementary for those students that were transitioning to Courtney from Royston. And I would like our Director Collier, who's leading that on behalf of the district, to speak a little bit about some of the plans and where we're at with the transition plan.
Thank you. Yeah, so on March 8th, last week, I had the pleasure of joining in on the transition planning meeting that was held at Courtney Elementary. And at that meeting, there were school teams from both Royston and Courtney L. And it included, of course, the principal and vice principal, also parents, representatives from both schools, and classroom teachers, counselor, learning support teacher, and support staff were there as well. And our task was to think about how could we come up with plans that would be supportive of transitioning. So there were 3 topics we focused on. One was positive transitioning for students. The other one was welcoming families into their new school community. And then also, how can we share Courtney L's strengths and highlights with the Royston families, things they might not know already about the school. Some of the highlights from our conversation, so we broke off into 3 groups. We had small group discussions about all of the topics. Very rich. We talked about how could we facilitate students feeling comfortable in coming to Courtney L, and some of the ideas were, for example, students at both schools sharing information about themselves with peers and the teachers. So, for example, maybe virtual pen pals. We also talked about ideas like sharing with the staff at Courtney L, each of the students from Royston, some partner, some kids they know from the school that they're very comfortable with, so that in class organization, they could make sure that there were some partnerships for kids in class. We talked about opportunities for students and staff to have visits between schools after the break. Some examples were small groups of learners who might go and meet with their grade level peers at the other school and get to know the teachers, allowing teachers to co-plan around exciting activities for smaller groups of students to do those visits. The Indigenous learners who work with their Indigenous support worker, the notion of bringing those groups together across schools. And just, well, all kinds of opportunities like that were brainstormed. In addition, we talked about students with unique needs, or if anybody is feeling anxious about the changes, and offering multiple opportunities for those students to meet the new people and get to know their new learning environment. And doing that in such a way that would be scaffolded, visits with the support of staff, and so as much as needed. So it could be, for example, visiting the school when there aren't any everyone, and so probably will be a barbecue when the weather gets better, and talking about possibly doing a welcome video all about the school and introducing the staff and kids to families at Royston and sending them a link. What came up as well was that we also had to be really conscious of honoring the feelings of saying goodbye as well. And so Royston is thinking about how can they have a meaningful event of some kind so that families can do that as well. So very balanced, thoughtful conversation. Other highlights I can share with you is that we found out the Courtney PAC president, right after the board had made that decision, sent welcome messages personally to all of the families that are transitioning. And we heard from a staff member at Royston that that was so well received and really, really appreciated by families. We learned new things about Courtney L, things I didn't know, but others didn't also know from Royston. For example, that the PAC has traditions like informal family meetups, and they've already scheduled one for in the spring break to invite families to join them at Courtney L playground so the kids can play and the families can get to know each other. And we had lots of fun seeing some of the fun activities that they do at Courtney L. Saw a video of the flash mob where the music teacher had all parents stand up in front of the school to drum and sing songs to AC/DC for all the kids in the gym. And I have to say the parents were really excited about a lot of the activities they do there, like that one. We also had the PAC vice chair, Courtney, and one of the teachers there demonstrate and do their little dance for us. They have a traditional, I guess, Courtney L song and dance that they do. And they have some interesting clubs like bicycling, Lego building, and open gym days where families can drop in for fun and games. So it was just a great experience to find out about all the interesting possibilities. What I can tell you is that I'm very confident that we have in those two school teams people who really care deeply about the kids and families transitioning, and I have no doubt that all of the transitioning activities will be worthwhile and very supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moving on, Assistant Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to reverse the order of these and talk about cross boundaries first. Normally, we do the cross boundary transfer process right away in January, but this year we decided to delay until February. We had it open for the whole month of February as a result of a pending decision process by the board. We wanted to make sure everyone had a fair shot at cross boundaries pending the decision that was made around Royston and Courtney L. So normally in a regular year we have almost 200 requests in a regular year. And they're split about 50-50 between secondary and elementary requests. This year we had a total of 73 requests, and 80% of those were from elementary schools, only 20% for the secondary schools. After spring break occurs, we go into our staffing process with elementary and secondary schools. And it's at that time that we look at all the cross-boundary requests and we facilitate those if we can. So that'll take place for elementary students in the mid-April. They should have some answers. And the secondary process is already somewhat underway, but will happen at the same time. So we hope to be able to notify all the families that Director Collier was speaking about before the end of the month, being April, that is. Are there any questions about cross-boundary?
Do you think that there was less people cross-boundary this year because of we had closed cross-boundaries, like at the high school level, I mean?
It definitely has had an impact from the board decision of a few years ago, has lowered that level. This year was an all-time low since I've been in the board office.
So looking at, you talk about numbers, and I'm just wondering, based on Beauregard projections and looking at our numbers for next year is probably tying into the cross boundaries. We look at those schools that are closed because on that one there. Looking at next year projections, are the trends still containing with some of our schools that traditionally been closed for cross boundaries? Those numbers are still going to be up there, or are we looking at a shift in demographics on where our students are moving within the valley?
There's a little bit of a shift in the demographic. We've talked about the Courtney corridor and talked about the Comox-Courtney boundary with our schools like Valley View and Aspen, Brooklyn. Those schools are shifting to become much fuller as time's gone by. We also have our issue with Royston, which is what led you to make the decision that you needed to make. So it has bounced around a little bit, and we're watching it. I can let you know that our kindergarten registrations are on par. We feel pretty confident about how many we have so far. And our overall registrations, that include kindergarten and grades 1 to 12 across the district, have been rolling in at a steady pace. So we're watching that, and that plays a big factor in how we're going to be able to place students as well.
And the reason I ask follow-up is because I'm looking at the development across from Quinish, and I'm looking at the major development in the last week alone, the property across from Mission, and they're clear cutting it and getting that one there. And I'm just wondering the impact of students moving in our district in the cross boundaries, we're talking about cross boundaries, but the over impact of our district student numbers. And do you project or predict that next year we may be looking at some challenges because of the shifting demographics of where students are moving or where they're going to?
We're definitely going to be looking at challenges in the next 2 to 3 years. I think we have a pretty good handle on the immediate year upcoming. I think we put everything into place where we're going to be able to handle the students that are coming to us. But yeah, there's a definite challenge in the next 2 to 3 years with growth.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we need to know and be prepared, and the community to know that we are going to face some challenges within our demographics of where students are going. Because years ago, when Trustee McDowell and I were on the board, we were losing students at 200 students a year and going down there, and it was difficult then, but to have them coming in there presents other challenges. And thank you for the update. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. The other thing I was hoping to speak to is graduation. As everybody knows, the last couple of years our grad ceremonies and procedures have been somewhat different with drive-by grads. It's been a big challenge, and our schools have really risen to the occasion and put on some fantastic events. They are very happy to report that they're looking forward to going back to a regular grad ceremony. I just wanted to give the board a quick update that the Highland grad will take place on May 28th at the Philburg. They're planning for an outdoor ceremony as they normally do, weather permitting. Vanier is planning on an outdoor ceremony at the fairgrounds, weather permitting. If weather is not permitting, they'll move into the sports center complex and have the grad like they have had previously inside the sports center. Isfeld is also planning an outdoor grad in the field area between Valley View and Isfeld on June 18th. It will be held indoors as well if the weather doesn't permit it. And Glacier View is planning their grad on June 23rd at 1 o'clock in Sims Park. So all of our schools are planning outdoor festivities and hope to be able to run at full capacity, and they're really looking forward to doing that.
And does Vanier have a date for theirs yet?
Vanier? Sorry, June 25th if they do it at the fairgrounds.
Okay,
If it's
I missed that.
indoor at the sports center, it will be June 24th.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
That's exciting.
It's very exciting,
That's good.
very exciting. Any questions? Lots of smiles. Secretary Treasurer.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson.
Money.
Money, money. So I wanted to do a quick overview of the funding announcement from the Ministry of Education. So on March 11th at 11 a.m., the ministry called all the secretary treasurers together to do their funding announcement for next year's annual budget, so the preliminary budget that the Budget Advisory Committee is going to work on. So we were very relieved to hear from the ministry that the funding formula changes, there was going to be no funding formula changes. So the per student rate of $7,885 per student is remaining unchanged, as well as all the other allocations are remaining unchanged. They are predicting collectively, so districts submit their enrollment projections to the ministry mid-February. So collectively, it's adds up to about a 0.04% increase across the province. So that amounts to 2,274 additional students districts are predicting. So the ministry is funding the enrollment growth, but no additional funding at this point. So we haven't seen any other comments regarding any, we know that the classroom enhancement funding is remaining unchanged, as well as our annual facility grant is remaining unchanged. So we're relieved to hear that. There doesn't seem to be any increases, and we're not yet certain about any additional funding around mental health supports or some of the other extra funding that we saw this year. But at least the regular funding is stable, so we're relieved about that. So the enrollment projections the district submitted was a 2.2% increase in our student enrollment. So around the 200 students that you mentioned, Trustee Caton, that you were previously losing, we're adding that now again. So that's 2.2% increases on top of the 5.3% we saw over the last 2 years in our bricks and mortar schools. So overall, we're getting close to an 8% increase within the last 3 years, which is significant for us to address as far as making sure we have spaces for all those young, eager learners. But we're very pleased to hear that the Classroom Enhancement Fund was unchanged and that the per student funding was going to remain the same. So overall, that amounts to, with the projections we submitted, our operating funding is just over $100 million now. So $101 million is what the district has grown to. So that's where we're at. And I'll have more in-depth information that will flow through the Budget Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Trustee Caton?
So just a clarification, my understanding is the ministry is funding for extra students, correct? But they're not funding for other cost, like for cost of living costs. They're not funding for hydro increases. They're not funding for any of those other costs that districts are going to experience because of inflation. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Okay, and the other one is, have they committed to funding for all the collective agreement settlements, or is that they've committed to, when the process happens and we get those settlements, have they committed to funding 100% those collective agreements? I'm sorry, but those are big impacts on districts.
They
that
are
have-
big
yeah.
impacts. I don't believe there's been any announcement yet regarding any collective agreement negotiations. That question was asked by Secretary Treasurers, and the answer was that that would be determined at the time of the settlements. So we haven't gotten any indication that it would be fully funded at this point. And there is not at the moment any increases for the per student rate didn't increase, so there's been no allowance yet for cost of living increases.
So that bodes well for the fact that you, and along with other Secretary Treasurers in the district, have always got a cautious approach when we've done our budget, because we have to be conscious of the fact that we can't guarantee to pay for what I'm saying, those inflationary costs that every district is going to occur. The money is not going to be there while it's for the students. So it's just something that, as we talk about money and budgets, I know we talk about a VISTA and a BCSTA, is that the government announces they give all this money, which is great, but in reality, they've not really funded the operational side of what we need. Am I kind of correct in that?
We are seeing significant cost escalations in our facilities departments and other costs. As you're aware, we'll be seeing increased transportation costs for our fuel surcharge, et cetera. The good news is that it was status quo and that it wasn't a reduction, but we have to then incorporate that in with our estimates of our costs for services and supplies. So, again, this year we've been very cautious with our budgeting process and allocations because of COVID, but now we have a lot of uncertainty and volatility around our expenses. And so, I don't believe there'll be a significant amount of flexibility in this year's budget process. We'll be able to maintain the services that we have, but we probably won't be able to have a significant discussion with the committee around some extras or some additional funding. So, that's the bad news side, I guess. But the good news side is at least we're not looking at cutting at this point.
At this point.
At this point.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that we saw the report that came from the Select Finance Committee, which was encouraging funding for school food programs, funding to support more mental health, funding for increases in the facilities grants, and you know, the hope for more funding for community links and community schools as a delivery model, and to support the anti-poverty actions that are done and all those sorts of things. And you know, there was a really warm reception by all of the participants in that committee and the recommendations. But we have to be mindful about the type of funding that demands that are being made on the province now because of collapsed highways and all the rest of the infrastructure needs. So so it's just it's good news that there are not cuts of any way, but it is definitely discouraging in terms of keeping up with the work that we know needs to be done. Yeah.
We have an excellent finance department that will work hard to balance the revenue and expenses projected.
Any questions or comments from any other trustees?
No, thanks, Brenda.
All right, thank you, Secretary Treasurer. The next item on the agenda is our Human Resources section, and we have no retirements and recognitions to recognize today, so no ability for me to do my math. So we're just
Zero years.
moving on. No math tonight, from me anyway. I saw the Secretary Treasurer had math, the Superintendent had math. No math for me. Moving on to our board standing committee reports. And first off, the Finance Committee Board Report. There was no meeting in March, but we have a verbal report.
Yes, we
from
do.
Trustee
Thank you, Chair.
Cooper.
At the last board meeting, we brought forth a discussion that the committee had regarding establishing a one-time trustee memorial bursary for former trustee and colleague Elizabeth Bunny Shannon. The plan is to bring forth a motion at next month to pass that. We just wanted to make sure that we did our due diligence and make sure that we got everything covered in the bursary and in the motion and the presentation. So it will be coming forth next month that the district allocate a $1,000 one-time bursary for a student in memory of trustee and colleague Elizabeth Bunny Shannon, and the criteria is what we're working on. So that will come at the next month meeting for hopefully approval from the board to acknowledge a colleague of ours who served the district for 19 years in the community in an amazing fashion. So just an update on where that stood.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that. So moving on to the Policy Committee Board Report. Wondering if somebody could move the recommendation.
I would like to move the recommendation that the Board of Education receive the Policy Committee Board Report as presented.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? And discussion. We'll share that in the, we can receive the report.
So the report includes a recommendation that I don't believe we're in a position to make at this point.
Right, but it isn't on the agenda. So if I could, and it's up to the board how we proceed with this. The policy committee met on March the 7th. They made a recommendation that the board would adopt the child care policy as presented. The child care policy is not in the package at this meeting. And so at our next meeting, I believe the intent is to bring forward the child care policy.
Yeah. You are correct, Chair. Under our procedural process, because the motion is not on the agenda itself,
Okay.
we don't have to worry about the report recommended it. The policy committee report recommended. All we're doing is we're approving the report. Because the recommendation is not on our actual agenda, it doesn't reflect to what Trustee McDonald was worried about. So it can come to our April board meeting.
If we were adopting the report, or different organizations do things different, but if we were to have adopted this, then we would be adopting the entire content, including the recommendation, but we're receiving the report. And we're looking forward to, the policy committee is looking forward to providing the draft policy 25 to the board.
Yeah, you can see that with the timing, the meeting being close last week with the agenda setting and all the rest of it. At
Yeah.
the time, I would appreciate some time when, this is a significant policy, and I appreciate the policy committee's work in reviewing it, but it always, you know, is important that all the trustees have a chance to look at it closely and ask questions. So hopefully we can get access to that draft before our, you know, the agenda package of next board. We just have a chance to get it, but yeah, okay, that clarifies
Yeah,
the whole
no,
question for me.
and
We're
it would
not
be- it would
suddenly
be,
approving something that is buried in the minutes of the report.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd be asking the board to approve a policy that most of the board has not seen yet.
Sometimes.
So, but it's a good, thank you for that. And thank you regarding process. So is there any further discussion on receiving the policy committee report? And all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you very much. And the facilities committee had no meeting in March. And so next, we're going to move into board business. And we have 2 items under board business. And the first was a motion provided by trustee McDonald.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So this item and the briefing notes for it are, you know, close to my heart. And as I said, I started the briefing note by saying that for more than 50 years we have known about climate change. And you know, advice when you're doing this kind of thing is always to tell your personal story. So it's for more than 50 years I've known about this. I was in high school and studied geography at McGill University 50 years ago and began that study at a time when we were concerned about the ozone hole. And so I have been part of an environmental activist community for many, many, many years. And that's when Limits to Growth came out from the Club of Rome. That's when all of the information about pesticide use and silent spraying and all of these things were common. So to see now after 50 years that we're here at a place where what we've known and we've deepened our knowledge of it, and the urgency has become even more clear. So there is a motion attached to this item, which, having some further discussion, was some concerns raised about this, and that if you establish a committee, we need the terms of reference in place. So I will have an alternate motion to present at this point. Do you want to have a motion on the table before we have further discussion, or do you want me to
That would be
have
helpful.
some background?
Yeah, I think the trustees,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
trustees need to hear the motion.
Yeah. So what this motion now would read, that the Board of Education, SD 71 Comox Valley, recognizes that there is a global climate crisis and that we have a shared responsibility to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate the impacts of climate change. And to that end, we refer the matter to the superintendent to consider next steps for consideration at our next board meeting.
So can I ask?
I will second that.
Can I ask just for you to repeat it,
Yeah,
please? And
Yes.
then we'll
yes.
go to next steps.
Yeah, so the original motion talked about establishing a climate
If you could
action.
just reread
Yeah.
what, sorry.
And this eliminates that particular task because it needs more thought about how that would be achieve? How will terms of reference be written?
So if you wouldn't mind just reading
Yeah.
the motion.
That the
Yeah.
Board of Education, SD 71 Comox Valley, recognizes that there is a global climate crisis and that we have a shared responsibility to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate the impacts of climate change. And to that end, we refer the matter to the superintendent to consider the next steps for consideration at our next board meeting.
So is there a
I'll
second?
second that. Yep.
Trustee Caton, did you?
I think Trustee McDonald can open the debate. She made the motion. She has the opportunity to open the debate, and then I'll speak after her.
Okay, I wasn't
Yeah.
sure if you were seconding. I was trying to catch what was going on, so thank you.
Okay, thanks. So, so in the briefing note, as I said, I identified, and of course I apologize for it being so long, but that's me. I would have liked to do it as a PowerPoint presentation with the images. So what I'm going to invite all of us to do is think about the images. What did we see this summer? We saw fires. We saw the Somos Prairie underwater. We saw people rescuing cows into boats. We saw that right here, not in Bangladesh, not in parts of the world. We saw drought. We experienced it ourselves in the valley, not in Africa. Not in Australia. And in Australia, after 7 years of drought, suddenly they have their entire year's rainfall in 3 hours. So February 28th, so I want us to keep those pictures in our mind. The fires, the flooding, the storms, the heat dome, the very strange excessive wetness and then cold in our winter here. Think about what we saw, snow piles, that just normally not our thing here. The extreme weather. And then think about our logo that has the glacier, Klinish. It's going to be gone in 30 years at the most. We see it retreat in front of us. So what some of us just jumped on 50 years ago and have been irritating and boring people for years is right here now. And the most recent report, a section on the current year's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says this report is a dire warning about the consequences of inaction. It shows climate change is a grave and mounting threat to our well-being and to a healthy planet. Our actions today will shape how people adapt and nature responds. Over the course of the last year, we had multiple presentations. A number of us attended some workshops here in the Valley for our, on the Valley resiliency. We heard a number of presentations at the Trustee Academy that focused on this, called us to action. Now, it's been a funny year because all of a sudden we're concerned it's urgent, and then Omicron. We're concerned it's urgent, and then a war. And both of those things just make this situation more urgent. But the underlying level of all of this, the existential threat, is in climate change. So while I know that we are trying to deal with many, many other things, I think that this is the time for us to make this statement, put it on record, and start working towards it. Now, this is not to say that any of the work that our staff and that our parents and teachers, and definitely not the work that our senior management and especially our operations that have been working on it for years, to say that any of that hasn't been important or that work within the resources we've had has made a difference. But it's a bit beyond that, and at this point, and I think the points that are made in this report are about working together. So I suggested a motion that said that my expectation was we can look at you know, we need to be doing this as a collaborative way. It's something that we're hearing from the ministry in terms of all the implementation plans. That's staff work, absolutely, but it also benefits from input. And Director Hesselgrave really explained how he works with his team by asking the different players, what do they see? What changes would they make? What are their priorities? What do they bring to the table? We need to do that with all of our partners, internal, all the teachers, the QP workers, the custodians. Everyone has a part to play, the principals and vice principals, in brainstorming, in giving advice to our senior management, and in giving feedback after plans are kind of put out. This is not a one-year thing. This is something that will take time. So my suggestion was that we just have a group that tries to have a couple of meetings and get together and talk about where this is, develops terms of reference and a bit of a work plan for the first stage, brings it back to the board. It was drawn to my attention, and that quite rightly, that if we're establishing a committee, the terms of reference need to happen. But I think that we've got to have a way to think about how do we develop them in a way that means it's collaborative, it's respectful of different roles, but it also brings in all the partners. We can't do this work without the municipalities, and they can't work without us. We know that our parents and community members have a lot to offer. And more than anything, we have been asking to hear from students. So what I'm coming back to now is that we make this declaration, and that we then will see some time to develop the piece of what will the framework look like? Will it be a committee? What will that process look like? What's been going on? Richmond had directed the superintendent and staff to develop a plan, and they worked on that for over a year. It's come back. Our neighbors in Qualicum have a climate action task force, is that word, that is co-chaired by 2 trustees and includes the partner groups. And they're proceeding to develop the plans and engage and build capacity. I think we could learn more about what they're doing. And we know that the BCSDA has a committee coming up. We know that the Ministry of Education may be bringing things to us. And we want to see that this is aligned with the framework for enhancing student learning and with the Indigenous ways of learning. All of these things are compatible in moving forward. And we want to make sure that we're mindful of what the workload is. But this is our legacy. This is our opportunity to put something and start this so that in the fall and moving forward, there is a framework and some groundwork done that will move this forward with a new board that may or may not include some of us, and that there's a sense of participation. Now, in 2013, the document that I provided then, when I was again inspired to say we gotta act now, it says we must drastically remake our own operations. It is not that we think educating students is our core function, but actually doing our part to have a future for them and educate them for it is important. There will be no future at all if we don't make these changes, if we continue on a business as usual basis. What does that do? It calls all of us. And it means that it can't just be our senior staff at the table. It can't. We have to find ways. We have a lot of staff and at all levels who are keeners like me. They're gonna get in there and rinse every container and every orange peel's going in the compost. And we've got students that want to bring that. But how do we make that more than these really exciting initiatives? How do we spread that? How do we scale it and scaffold it? I think that's the educational term. How do we bring on board the people who are like, oh, it's never going to work, or, well, we don't need to do that? How do we build the capacity and the momentum? So the point in all of this is that a lot of it is like, oh God, we have to change everything, and it's going to be horrible. But actually, the the evidence right now, the movement is coming now with hope. And our district's done a wonderful job with Serena Allison and bringing Ellen Kelsey to make sure that what is done and what's done collectively is done with hope, that we actually make a better world, that our quality of life becomes better, simpler, more engaged, more collective, less anxiety. So I am really, really hopeful that as we move into doing this and we make it flexible so that these emerging items can come, and that we find ways to bring in the talents and the energy that people will have and build on that this will be a good thing for our district. It will be a good thing for our district in terms of operations and addressing a crisis, and we won't forget it if we think of this lens. And it'll also be a good thing for our students, for how we go forward. Now, I have all kinds of ideas. I suggested in 2013 that we go to a 4-day week, and I'm still there. But it isn't just about me. I'll say you've got, and a 4-day week's not just about a 20% cut in greenhouse gas emissions like that, which is good. It's also about more family time, more about only getting your child up and packing a lunch 4 days a week instead of 5. It's about having a day in community for kids to pursue what their passions are, for errands to be done by the staff and still have a weekend to rest and relax. So you've got a program that fits a whole bunch of different things.
Trustee
It might not be the
McDonald?
Yes.
We would love to
I
hear
could talk
any
for
of the other
another hour if
trustees.
you would think
We,
that.
and
Yes.
I appreciate
Yeah.
your passion, and we all appreciate your passion. But I would love
Yes.
to give some of the other trustees an opportunity to speak to the motion.
Okay, if I could just wrap up, what I'm saying is that the secret of moving together, moving forward, and making the change we need for a better world, we start this now, it becomes our legacy. We know we need to do it. We put it down on paper, we put it on the wall, and I'm asking for your support to take this first step, mindful of all the other challenges and issues, and we just start to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Keating.
Thank you, Chair. So I would like to acknowledge that Trustee McDonald is correct. We are dealing with the climate issue. We have the atmospheric rivers that we have experienced this winter, and the heat dome has a definite impact on all of us. And I also recognize that BCSD has a climate working group working with districts to do some of the things that Trustee McDonald has talked about. I also acknowledge and recognize that last year our association passed the following motion, that the BCSDA urged the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Environment and Climate Change to provide funding to support climate literacy in all BC schools, including funding for curriculum supports, materials, equipment, and professional development opportunities that Trustee McDonald was talking about it. But it also takes time. And I know that the ministry is working with school districts. But what I am concerned, and you have presented your views in your paper, that's your views, and some of them are quite valid, and some of them I do have some concerns about it. But the concern that I have is the time frame you've asked senior management to get back to you is next board meeting. And I don't believe that is doable. I think we need to have senior leadership have a little more time. This is a very large and complex issue that we're talking about, and it encompasses a multitude of things. So while I like the fact that you've referred this to senior leadership to go through the proper processes, I also am not comfortable with giving them a 1 month, the next month time frame. I don't think it's doable to get it right, to the way that what you're talking about, to have all the impact and all the processes and the inclusion that you want in there. So being that we are coming to spring break, being that we're going through a reconfiguration, being that we're going through staffing, and looking at senior leadership's time, I think they need more than a month. And I would like for you to consider maybe extending it to maybe, and I'm not sure, I'm going to turn to the superintendent. I know that you guys are extremely busy, and I know that the Ministry of Education is coming back with something to deal with some of the things that Trustee McDonald was talking about within the new budget and time frame. And I'm wondering, Trustee McDonald, rather than saying next month, if we can maybe give them a couple extra months, just they have the time to work it and have a bit more clarity and come back with something that works for all of us and we're not rushed to doing it.
If I could respond to that, I'm not asking them to come with a very specific plan. In fact, the superintendent might come back and say that there are many things to consider. I would hope that if there was a sense that having some kind of a coordination between all the multi-partners, and that's something that's really strongly recommended through FESL and stuff.
But
that
your
he would
motion
come back
says-
with some terms of reference, but it would be up to him.
But your motion says April, and what I'm wondering
My
is.
motion says consider next
Month.
steps, not
For
come
next.
with a plan.
So can I just
Yeah.
hang on for a
Yeah.
sec? I'm gonna ask if the motion can be read again. Because I don't know who has the motion.
You do.
That the Board of Education ST71 Comox Valley recognizes that there is a global learning crisis and that we have a shared responsibility to reduce our GHG emissions and mitigate the impacts of climate change. To that end, we refer matters to the superintendent to consider next steps for consideration at our next board meeting.
And that's what I think that we need to take out the next board meeting. I think that time-wise, Trustee McDonald, it's not practical, and I would maybe leave that next meeting out there and work with senior leadership to find a time frame that works for everybody, because as you say, this is a very important issue. We want to get it done correctly and also conscious of our senior leadership's time.
So just hang on a
Yeah.
second. So we have a motion on the floor. It's been spoken to by 2 trustees. Are there any other trustees who would like to speak to the motion? So I see Trustee Howe and I see Trustee May Schatz that only the folks in the boardroom can see, and she's with us virtually. So Trustee Howe?
I think that just given that there's a time limit on it, I mean, I feel like I'm just a little bit unclear about what the expectation is, because it doesn't seem like there's a high expectation. It just seems like you're asking us to pass a motion to, like, figure out how we would go about even starting what the terms of reference would look like.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem like, I mean, we can extend the timeline and say a specific time, but then that's also just putting a boundary on them. Like, I kind of feel like, can't we accept the motion with an open-ended timeline that this is something that we all agree with, and it can be like a fluid thing that's going to start to happen, and maybe in the next few months we can figure out what that looks like. I mean, we're 4 days away from a 2-week holiday. There's no way that, but I think if we just like altered that I think you said that phrase. I don't know if you necessarily meant that they were coming back with terms of reference next month. I don't think that was your expectation.
Not at all. My expectation is that he might come back, the superintendent might come back and say, it will take us a few months to develop terms of reference. Or the question was, even if we were to have terms of reference and a work plan for a committee, what is it, does it fit under, is it referred to the policy committee? Is it referred to what? Is it a new committee? Is it a committee of the whole? I had thought that maybe there would be a meeting and a discussion about that, but we can't have the meeting until there are terms of reference, so then it's left to the superintendent to do some research
So
and
would we
conversation.
make an amendment to the motion then,
Can I just hang on
or?
a second? So I was going to suggest that if folks are considering that they might like the motion altered, they could consider an amendment. But we do have a trustee who hasn't spoken, who's waiting for the opportunity to speak. So if you would like to unmute and share your thoughts with us, Trustee May Schatz, we'd love to hear them.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I just wanted to mention is that part of climate action is action itself, and I believe that our school district has actually done a phenomenal job of doing numerous projects, upgrades, things in our district that have yet to be quantified. All of our HVAC upgrades has made a significant increase on the energy efficiency and the health factor of our schools.
Thank you very much. And the superintendent was asked to be added to the speakers list, so
Sure.
please go ahead.
Thank you, and it is a very important topic, and we recognize that. It is a busy time of year. Looking at a calendar between BCST AGM in April, where Easter's placed, where spring break is, and not including, we do have our Equity in Action workshop. It leaves what I'm looking at quickly about 6 days from now until the next board meeting. So what I can commit to is to engage senior staff in a discussion in terms of what we think would be some logical processes and bring that back. It will not be comprehensive. We could not do that. Rather, a very overview of some possible ideas. We could commit to that, but beyond that, I just don't see, unless the board wants to engage in a discussion around what other things we can move off the plate of some of the folks here, that would be a recommendation. But we could have a discussion in one of our leadership meetings and sort of some big ticket, next steps, possible ideas. Commit to something like that.
So I see Trustee Caton has her hand up, and then I think Trustee McDonald would like to speak as well.
So I would like to make the amendment to change it from the next meeting to the June meeting. Where it says
Okay, is
from
there
the
a
next
seconder?
meeting to the June board meeting.
Is there a seconder to the amendment to the June meeting? There's trustee on the screen. Trustee Schatz has seconded the amendment. Is there discussion on the amendment?
Well, I'm just listening to the discussion, and you're right, it's a lot. And I've listened to the superintendent, and I believe that if we give him that flexibility, that when he brings back to the board will be a comprehensive report that will meet the needs of what we talked about tonight. But when you've got 68 days to do it, and you're looking at May with all that's going on, giving June is that flexibility that I believe the senior staff will need to do exactly what we were discussing here tonight and have that fulsome conversation. And as a possibility, he could have it here by the May meeting, but I don't want to just constrain him in a time frame with all that's going on in the district. So I think giving that flexibility, address the needs of all of us, and looking at the climate issues we have, looking as what Trustee Sapp was saying, as what our district has done, bringing that to the table and addressing the concerns that Trustee McDonald has brought up also.
Would you like to?
Well, I was hoping that we would be able to have some kind of framework, that we would have at least one conversation before the end of this school year, that we would be leaving the school year with a bit of a sense, yes, we've got common purpose, we're going to mobilize for the war on climate change, which is what needs to happen. And then, our board meeting at the very end of June will not really give any time for that to happen, and then we'll have a slow pickup again in September, and then we'll be gone, some of us, perhaps all, who knows. But, so I really apologize for not explaining better. I'm not looking for a comprehensive plan. I think that this will take at least a year. I think that what we were looking for was some kind, that framework in which the discussions would happen. And the original motion included, we need to identify and implement tangible actions. So some of those are staff, some of those are behavior change some of those are how parents send the lunch kits. Some of those are what students do to encourage each other to pick up the garbage that they throw their pop cans into the non-recyclables. All of these things are a long-term proposal, and that what we're really looking for is what's the framework that we need to have those conversations, and that it's a process starting with understanding our current situation. I know that we can ask Director Hesselgrave, he makes regular reports, and he will, I'm sure, September seemed like a very good opportunity for him to be able to wrap up the year and make that kind of background information about where are we at and where do we move from here, so we really all know the numbers. Those are all parts of what we're looking at. What comes first? Who does what? I'm not looking for comprehensive you know, plan beyond the idea that I do believe this needs to be done collaboratively. I do believe it needs a structure where there's a broad discussion, lots of ideas brought to the table, lots of feedback around this. As senior management work on this, they're gonna know what's resonating with people, what will people pick up and go and do some of that work and spread this message, what's operational, what is curricular changes. This covers a lot of different aspects. What are our behavioral changes? How do we all become SD 71 cares about this environment, from what we buy to what resources we give. We're not, this may have budget implications in the next round of budgets, not right away. We're not looking for, this may take 2 years, and it may take ongoing lobbying with the government.
So
to
can I just
say-
do a point of order, Trustee McDonald? We're actually debating changing the date from April to June,
Yes.
not the actual motion, and you're actually debating the motion itself right now. Just a
I'm-
point of order.
I object to changing the date, because I think that you speak about giving that date, giving him time for a comprehensive plan, and this motion does not ask for a comprehensive plan.
Okay, thank you. So is there any further discussion on the amendment to change the date from the next board meeting, which would be April, I'm in the right month, to the June board meeting?
Can I just ask a question?
Please.
So like procedurally, or like how does it work where, like, Trustee Caton's referring to, you know, the ministry and BCSTA like implementing things or encouraging people to sort of move towards this, the direction that Trustee McDonald's speaking about. So like as a district, if we were like to, let's say, get some funding around this, would this be something that like there's like a broad kind of way that they expect you to spend money, or would this be something that a committee is going to be formed anyways? Like I just don't, I just want a little clarification around like.
We don't know yet.
Okay.
At this point.
Okay.
We've heard that Director Hasselgrave shared that from his sources that the board will be required to pass a policy and have a policy in play around climate action. So we're waiting for further direction to come to do that. In order to do anything, even a high level, for example, and I'll address a concern there, or something that was brought up, something that teachers, staff can do in schools, whatever it may be, anything like that is going to require time to meet with people.
Yeah.
And just where we're at, current year coming off, right in the middle of, we just don't have that time. We could make that time if we were to move other stuff off and say this is, if we're going to get into any sort of, not even detailed, but beyond, to make a plan or even present things that are inclusive, we would want to include other individuals. As a senior team, we can give very high, a high level look at this, saying based on what we're seeing, here's some things we know a policy needs to be developed. You know, I'm just throwing, those would be some of the things that we could be prepared to do in a short time frame. Beyond that, and it wouldn't be much more than that, beyond that we would need more time. So I think to clarify, even a high level won't have exact details of who, what, where, when, why, and how. Rather, here's some suggested target areas, you know, things we look at. Developing a policy would be one. You know, looking at little things that, ideas to consider, and then from there, it would be a process, right, to develop that. As we know what the policy process took us last time, it was quite a lengthy process for a policy that we just passed 24. So I would assume that the same thing would occur. It would be a lengthy process to go through this.
So just hang on a second now. So we have, it feels like I need a gavel. Have you guys ever had a gavel before? Is there?
Really,
Okay,
yes, and
good,
I've used it
good,
before,
good to
too.
know for next time.
I usually-
So we have an amendment to the motion on the floor. If there, oh, we have a speaker. So, Trustee May Schatz, would you like to unmute and speak to the amendment? And just the amendment on extending from April till June, please.
Thank you. I just love the concept and idea of this. I love the idea of our board taking action on this, but I feel that it is way too important of a topic. And I feel that in order to ask our entities to do something, that it should be in a sufficient amount of time that they can present us with something tangible and that we can all move forward and take steps with. And so I'm in support of us delaying to get a more thorough look at what our school district has done and what we can do, as opposed to trying to rush and get, I don't know what they can produce in 6 days that I've heard is all that's available, that's very unfortunate. We're so busy. So I like the idea of postponing so that we can look at this very thoroughly and get some more information and learn more about the topic for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any other trustees who've not had the opportunity to speak on the amendment that would like to speak? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, let's make sure I get it right, to have the information returned for June, for the June meeting versus the April meeting, please show. Please raise your hands if you would like June, if you would like the amendment to pass. 3, 4. Okay, down, opposed? Okay, the amendment's been carried. So now the motion reads, now we need to actually pass the motion, and I'm gonna ask Heidi to read the motion, including the amended change.
The Board of Education and Executive Climate Neutrality recognizes that there is a global climate crisis and that we have a shared responsibility to reduce our GHG emissions and mitigate the impacts of climate change. To that end, we refer the matter to the superintendent to consider next steps for consideration at our June board meeting.
Thank you. Are there any trustees that would like to speak to the motion? Trustee Howe?
I just don't understand why we're like putting a month on it. Like, I just don't, I guess I'm just unclear as to like what's coming back. Like, I feel like the motion is encouraging us to like look at how we can better our situation in the district as it pertains to the environment, and like potentially the end game is to like figure out how we can have a working group or some type of environmental stewardship group. So I just don't know why every little step has a timeline on it. Is that normal? Or can we just say that you're gonna work on it and then you're working on it and we'll just keep talking? Like, I don't know,
I think that
I just feel like-
timeline is off, well, I would say, if I could, that often motions have timelines on them
Okay.
to create actionable items
Okay.
to come to a certain
Okay.
time, right? So that it's not open-ended.
Okay.
Is-
I just
is-
don't
is
remember
how-
that
is how I'm-
like
is how I'm
being the
reading
way
it
that
with
it
the
was
timeline.
before, so I'm
Yeah.
just asking
Did you-
for clarification.
Our current bylaws require that if a new committee of some kind is established, it requires terms of reference to be presented at the time. My idea, as I was not bearing that in mind, was that the terms of reference would be developed in a discussion with representatives of our partner groups, as well as the trustees and senior management. That not being possible, all of that was taken out and left to the superintendent to come back. But really, the goal is to have some kind of framework, which might or might not have an ad hoc committee with a certain makeup that would start the process of asking for reports, developing a policy. That's exactly what is, Qualicum developed a policy. We don't currently have one. That would be a board matter referred to the policy committee. Operational report would be a request to Director Heselton to update the reports on what has happened. A review of our curriculum status and how much we've been able to transition towards environmentally themed. What might be necessary to pivot our trades programs to green transition skills rather than oil patch and skills. So those sorts of things would be discussed once the committee is established, if a committee is established. And that process will take a long time. And that process is about building a list of priorities. What's easy? What's so important? It's hard, but it's really important. What's on the priority list? What needs resources? What needs energy and education? That plan will take a long time. The intent is not to take up the time of our superintendent and his team right now in coming back with a tickety-boo, here's the perfect plan, we'll follow it, because it's evolving. All sorts of things are going to be coming to the table that we will have to respond to. So the idea of a process that will get started, that will look at the full spectrum, and then respond and adapt as necessary as the program moves forward every year, the review. It's not, I think that probably the 3 months or 2.5 months is probably enough for the superintendent to respond, do some consultation with his team and what else is going on out there, and come up with enough of a framework, committee or not, somewhere housed, that we are taking actions and that it is done. I hope he will discover, or he will reiterate, that it's done on a very collaborative basis and a capacity building basis, because that's the approach the ministry is talking about, wanting us to do. It's compatible with our Indigenous education mandate. It's compatible with how we build capacity and have positive outcomes. That's all. So I would like, to see it, a framework at least, that will let a new board coming in, gathering together, reviewing our current strategic goals, hopefully reinforcing environmental sustainability as a strategic goal, and then being able to build on that. The next board, the next 4 years, will be getting awfully close to 2030, at which point we were supposed to have our greenhouse gases cut in half.
So, thank you. Trustee Howe?
Yeah, sorry, it was more just around, because we have like these unknowns from other like sources, that I was just unclear about like our procedure. I'm not, I'm totally in support of the motion. I just wasn't sure, like,
It's important to ask
if
questions.
it's normal to put timelines on stuff, let's do
Yes.
it. Let's put some timelines
It's important to
down.
ask questions, yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Are there any other trustees that would like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please show. Opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you. And I would say that this is a very complex subject that all of our trustees take very seriously. And we want to it felt like we wanted to make sure that we were doing it the right way to try to achieve the best outcomes for our district and our communities. And thank you to all of the trustees for your thoughtful comments and for the work going into preparing the information for the trustees to read, and for everybody's input. So thank you all.
So,
Secretary Treasurer?
just to clarify, Chair, the motion passed unanimously as amended.
As amended,
As
yes.
amended, okay,
Yeah.
just to clarify.
Yeah. Apologies for that. All right, so next, under board business, we have a verbal update from our Vancouver Island School Trustee Association, also known as VISTA, by Trustee Caton.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I do want to start off it with an acknowledgement. For many years, VISTA, our district has been honored to hold the VISTA conference at our district. And in doing so, we've invited a Comox elder, Fran Prince, to come and open up and give us the blessing. Fran recently passed away. She was a dear friend of myself, and I haven't seen her for the last few years. She always came to our VISTA meetings. She came with a smile. She shared her stories, and I know that our association and myself as a trustee was blessed to have her attend, and I like to acknowledge her, the Comox First Nations, and the Indigenous community for losing an elder that had a great impact on myself in this district. So on behalf of VISTA, as president of VISTA, I just wanted to acknowledge that passing and the loss of an elder in the Comox Valley and Comox First Nation. So I just want to start off with that. So thank you for allowing me to do that. VISTA had our Zoom meeting, and it was 48 trustees on Zoom, and I'm trying to organize this meeting, and you've got one on there with 48 people on the screen, and it was quite a challenge. And I'm so glad we're almost over these Zoom meetings because it's quite challenging to be the host on that one. So we presented our meeting, and we started off with an extremely difficult topic. It was a subject that is hard for people to talk about. It's a topic, and I know that Sean Lemeroux was kind enough to refer a couple of groups for me on that one, and it's regarding the stigma of mental health. And we had a group of individuals talk about their life story and their journeys suffering from mental illness and the stigma of mental illness. And for some people in the audience, it was very difficult to hear. It was very difficult to listen. When you talk about mental illness, sometimes you just think about anxiety, but mental illness encompasses more than anxiety. There's a lot to do with it. And one of the things that when you have mental illness to talk about, and people don't want to talk about it, is the issue of suicide. And we had a young man on there who talked about his thoughts of how he would kill himself. And it was very hard to listen to, and very hard to hear. And most of the feedback that I got from was people, it's time to start having that conversation. We talk about mental illness, mental support, but we have to look at the stigma of mental health. So we had this group come in, and it was a difficult conversation. I'm glad I had them, and I'm glad to start the conversation. So they came, did an hour presentation, and so that was the start of our meeting. Then we had Allison Watson from SD 62. She's a newly appointed chair of the BCSD Climate Working Group. And she introduced Dr. Laurie Adamson from the BC Chapter of Physicians for the Environment and to provide trustees with a background on some curriculum that's being offered right now. She is an emergency room doctor, and to talk about what Trustee McDonald was talking about, in her work at the hospital, she talks about the anxiety that the youth are having regarding the environmental crisis that we are right now and the impact on that, and encourages us to have those conversations, which we started to do tonight. So I thank you for the conversations. It's really important that we continue focusing on, because our children and our youth today are very aware of the environment and the crisis that we have. We also had, I've got my notes here. We also had a couple of conversations regarding with Tracy Lofter, who talked about the work of the Board of Directors. And at our academy, the BCSDA Board of Directors and FINESS, the First Nation Education Steering Committee, will be signing administrative MOU of understanding, working together to support our students. The Anti-Racism Working Group is another group from BCSDA. We'll be working with districts to look at racism within districts. We also talked about the AGM coming up there, and former Lieutenant Governor Stephen Point will be attending and presenting to trustees. The theme of our academy is dealing with truth and reconciliation, and we're learning how to listen so you can listen to learn, and walking with our elders as they talk about their times in residential schools, and having us understand why truth and reconciliation is extremely important. BCSTA has our AGM with a couple of motions. Our board, myself and Trustee Joe Thorne, brought a motion regarding student voice, and our motion on student voice and supporting students has been accepted for AGM resolution, and Gulf Islands motions regarding the truth and reconciliation calls to action has been brought forth to the branch. There was a motion that I get to write a letter to the Ministry of Education to talk about corporate messaging in our curriculum, and recommendation by our BCAC president that school boards look at corporate sponsorship within their district, and I think our district is pretty good on that. I think we have a really good policy, but that's something that they've talked about, boards looking at it. And they want the Ministry of Education to conduct a review of the curriculum and align it with the science-based facts. And it was a really good meeting, and after 2 hours, we had a great conversation, and trustees got to have a conversation about climate, and I will say that the debate at that meeting is very similar to tonight, very passionate concerns about climate. We all agree it's an issue, and we're working together to find resolutions and better educate ourselves and move forward. So that's my report in a Cole's Note version, and I'm open to any questions if anybody has any questions.
Is there any questions for Trustee Caton? All right, thank you, Trustee Caton. Seeing no questions, we'll move on to board correspondence. We have 2 pieces of correspondence. The first was a letter to the school district from the City of Courtenay acknowledging their support for our, would you like to speak to it?
Sure.
Secretary Treasurer before I just ramble on?
So the letter of support from the City of Courtenay, it was a result of our meeting that senior staff had with senior staff at the City of Courtenay, and we mentioned our 2 applications for the MCFD grants, and the city was very supportive, so they wrote a letter expressing the support of their mayor and council for our applications. We still haven't heard of either the success of those applications, so we're still hopeful that we will be receiving information soon. So we were very appreciative that mayor and council supported the grant applications, and we're hopeful that they'll be successful.
Thank you. Is there any questions regarding that letter? No? Okay, so we have one more board item under board correspondence, and it's from the BCSTA, and I'm wondering if the Secretary Treasurer would speak to this. It was addressed to the board chairs and the Secretary Treasurers.
Sure. So this is an item of information for the board that the board chair and myself received a request to complete a climate change survey. So BCSTA, as Trustee Caton and Trustee McDonald mentioned, have formed a climate change working group, and they'd like to understand the initiatives the district has taken around climate action and climate change. So the goal of the survey is to review the document and to kind of develop best practices throughout the sector for lowering emissions. So what our plan, the chair and myself, was to find a time that Director Hesselgrave was available to complete the survey together, because Director Hesselgrave will have the most accurate information around the different initiatives that we've been doing within the district. So, and the survey is required to be completed by April 8th, so we were hoping to find a time when we could meet to complete the survey.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the Secretary Treasurer? I know it was for information. Okay. All right, seeing none, it is 8:44. I'm wondering if there are any questions that have been provided to us through the computer. That's okay. You were looking behind you. I was worried. Seeing no questions for our public question period, I just want to again extend my thanks to all of the trustees tonight for their respectful, thoughtful, and engaged debate through the, I want to find a better word than confines, parameters of our board bylaws and our processes that we need to follow. And to thank you all again for attending tonight, and look for a motion to adjourn. Trustee Howe, seconder. Trustee Mayschatz. All those in favor, they show. The meeting is adjourned at